There's a side of Las Vegas that tourists never see. Past the gleaming casinos and show lights, there's a shadowed place that's been around long before Vegas became Vegas. I'd heard about it in whispers, as a place of legend and horror, one of those places locals didn't discuss with outsiders. My friend Jordan told me about it, almost like a dare. He called it the Lost Den, because no one who'd visited ever seemed to return the same, or they didn't come back at all. People see things there, Jordan said in a hushed tone, his face pale. I went once, and I swear I saw someone, or something. It looked right through me. And then things just moved on their own, like they were controlled by someone else. There's no way I'm ever going back. Of course, I brushed him off. I was skeptical about the supernatural, convinced that it was just a story crafted by locals to keep the curious out. But Jordan's story stayed with me, nagging at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. So one Saturday night, after a few too many drinks, I decided to see this so-called Lost Den for myself. As I arrived, the place was just as he described it, crumbling, dark, and barely lit by flickering neon that buzzed angrily. The building looked ancient, with a facade that suggested it had seen centuries pass. It wasn't some flashy Vegas attraction. It felt like something forgotten, ignored, and left to rot. Inside, the smell hit me first, something rancid, like mold and decaying wood, mixed with the stale scent of cigarettes and whiskey. It was a far cry from the polished interiors of the Strip's casinos. Here, the walls seemed to absorb the misery of its patrons, and the dim lighting barely illuminated the worn, dated tables and slot machines that looked older than anything I'd ever seen. I made my way to the bar, which seemed out of place, as though someone had dragged a piece of the Old West and forced it to fit into the shabby casino. The bartender was a hunched figure, his eyes dark and deeply set, his skin so pale it looked almost blue. When he saw me, he offered no greeting, just a knowing look that sent chills up my spine. "First time here?" he asked, voice low and gravelly. I nodded, barely able to respond. As I took a seat, I felt a weight settle over me, an oppressive heaviness that made the air thick and hard to breathe. "People say this place is haunted," I said, forcing a casual tone. The bartender laughed, a deep, unsettling sound. "Depends on what you call haunted. Some folks say it's cursed." My skin prickled at his words, but I couldn't back out now. I ordered a drink, feeling the bartender's gaze on me the whole time. He didn't ask questions or try to make small talk. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on me, as if he knew something I didn't. When I took my first sip, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping past the rows of slot machines. I turned, but there was nothing there. Shaking my head, I blamed it on nerves and took another drink, trying to ignore the dark, creeping sensation that something was terribly wrong. That's when I heard it, a soft whisper, just by my ear. I whipped around, but the nearest person was several feet away, minding their own business. The whisper returned, this time louder, the words unintelligible but urgent, as though whoever it was wanted my attention. I stood up, looking around, but saw nothing unusual, just the worn-out tables, the dull lights, and the shadows that seemed to shift with every step I took. But as I scanned the room, I noticed something. There, among the rows of empty seats, sat a lone figure, staring straight at me. He was pale, dressed in clothes so old They looked like they'd come from another era. His eyes were dark hollows, empty and haunting, his gaze fixed on me with a chilling intensity. I blinked, and he was gone, as if he'd dissolved into the shadows themselves. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the dim light. But then I saw movement again, this time closer, and felt a presence lingering around me, invisible, yet undeniably real. I backed away, nearly stumbling over a table behind me, and that's when the first slot machine started to spin on its own. I stared in horror as one by one the old machines came to life, their clinking and whirring sounds echoing through the room. There was no one touching them, no one pressing buttons or pulling levers, and yet they spun almost in unison, as though commanded by an unseen hand. The sound grew louder, building into a cacophony that made my head throb. I turned to leave, desperate to escape, but the door was gone. Or rather, it was still there, but as I rushed toward it, the space seemed to stretch, the distance expanding, until the door was impossibly far away. It was like the casino itself was shifting, bending the space around me, trapping me inside. I spun around, my breathing ragged, and saw him again, the man with the hollow eyes. This time, he was closer, his gaze drilling into me with an intensity that made me feel exposed, vulnerable, as though he could see every secret I'd ever kept. I wanted to look away, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot by a force I couldn't comprehend. Then he spoke, his voice a low guttural rasp that echoed through the room. "You shouldn't have come here." The words hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly everything changed. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the whispers louder, merging into a single mournful wail that filled my ears and made my heart pound with fear. I turned, desperate to find an exit, but the walls seemed to close in, trapping me. That's when I felt something brush against my arm, a cold, bony hand that sent shivers down my spine. I looked down and saw nothing, but the sensation remained, as though invisible hands were reaching out, clawing at me, trying to pull me deeper into the darkness. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that moved and danced around me, and in each shadow I saw faces, gaunt, pale, and staring at me with eyes full of malice. They were the faces of the dead, spirits trapped in this cursed place, bound by some ancient force that kept them tethered to the casino. And now they had their sights set on me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice was swallowed by the darkness, muffled by the oppressive silence that had descended over the room. The slot machines had stopped spinning, and the only sound was the soft, shuffling footsteps of the spirits as they moved closer, surrounding me on all sides. Desperate, I backed up against the wall, my eyes darting around for any sign of escape, but there was none. The spirits pressed in, their faces twisted with anger and sorrow, their hollow eyes filled with a hunger that sent waves of terror through me. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the man with the hollow eyes appeared in front of me, his face inches from mine. His breath was cold against my skin, and his eyes bored into mine with a hatred so intense it felt like he was peeling away my soul, stripping me down to nothing. "You don't belong here," he hissed, his voice echoing in my head. "But now you can never leave." With a flick of his hand, the room went dark, the oppressive silence returning with a vengeance. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. couldn't move. It was as though I'd been swallowed by the darkness itself, consumed by the weight of the centuries-old curse that hung over this place. When the lights finally flickered back on, I was lying on the casino floor, alone. The spirits were gone, and the room was empty, save for the faint echo of the slot machines in the distance. I stumbled to my feet, my entire body trembling, and made my way to the door, which had somehow returned to its original place. I left without looking back, feeling the weight of the curse pressing down on me, even as I stepped outside. And as I walked away, I knew that a part of me was still trapped in that casino, bound by the same dark force that had claimed so many before me. Even now, I can still feel it, the pull of the lost den, the cold grip of the spirits, and the hollow gaze of the man who warned me too late. I know that one day I'll have to go back, because once you enter the den, it never truly lets you go.